Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started now. It is 8 o'clock, and thank you for coming. And we're going to do a little different format. For those of you who have been here before, we have often done this each quarter, and we focused on the economy, and we want to give a little update on what's going on. And I have to confess, I pulled all the data as of February 26th, and then I believe it was February 27th that some things changed in the global economy. Now, I have since then added some additional information. So you'll get a little bit of an update on where we are broadly in the markets and the economy. However, then I want to talk a little bit about what the current conflict in Iran is meaning. But what I'm most excited about today is we're going to have Ralph Serpe from the Adams County Community Foundation with us. And what we've decided to do here in 2026 is take our economic update and pair it with something that we think is has good adjacency, if that's a word, to our financial planning work. And so I've asked Ralph to come talk a little bit and share some stories and generosity, because a lot of our clients like to think about ways that they can do good things with their money, and everybody's heard me say you can't take it with you. And so what's the plan if you accept the premise that you can't take your money with you? Colin on our team, who some of you may know, says you've never seen a hearse with a U-Haul behind it. So before we jump in real quick, I think on that one. Before we jump in, I want to introduce two members of our team who are here with us today. The first, may be a familiar face, one of our wealth advisors, Chris Van Hart. Chris has been with us for 18 years in some form or another. So excited to have him here. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of timeline is our newest planning associate, Allie French. Allie joined us just in the last month, and we're excited to have her as part of the team. So welcome, both of you. So I think it's always good in a time when the market is really volatile, and we've seen stocks pull back here since the beginning of March and the beginning of hostilities in Iran. And however, it is but merely a blip here on where we've been over the last I'll call it 30 years. And so we see several market cycles in here. The first two kind of peaks and valleys would be the tech bubble and then the Great Recession. And then we've seen a tremendous amount of growth with a setback around the pandemic, a setback in 2022. But most of those setbacks were quickly recovered. I don't know what will happen here, but we are still very close, even in spite of what's happening, close to all-time highs in the market. And there's some reasons for that. But I would also start by saying that I think stocks are a little expensive right now. Even before, obviously, they pulled back a little bit, but they're still expensive. And what I mean by that is I think the best way to value stock is how much money is it earning? Is that company earning? And so just as a generic example, we take the S&P 500, the 500 biggest companies, and we say, if the average company there is earning $10 a share, then they should trade at about 17 times their earnings, or $170 a share. And as of 2 weeks ago, they were all around $217 a share. So a bit expensive from a historic perspective. And so I think it's just time to recognize that even in spite of what's happening overseas, before that, stocks were very expensive. And what we're saying is the stock market had grown much faster than the overall economy and much faster than the earnings of these companies. And so I think we're certainly, when we get above that top line, which is one standard deviation away from the average, when we get above that $20 or 20 times earnings, we start to think that stocks are getting pretty frothy and expensive. And so there's only two ways for that line to get better. One is earnings really have to continue to grow meaningfully, and stocks probably need to hold tight or not grow as fast, or stocks need to lose price and come down, which is probably the more common thing that we see. I think another interesting dynamic, though, too, is, and this is a chart that I've become a little fond of, is just to see the amount of concentration. And the top 10 companies in the S&P 500. So take the 500 biggest companies. What this chart is telling us is the top 10 of those 500 biggest companies in the United States are 40% of the value of the other 490 companies. So we have a lot of concentration. Oh, and by the way, they're mostly tech or tech adjacent. The exceptions would be JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway. Now, what's also interesting is these are the top 10 companies of the 500 biggest companies in the United States. These are the 10 biggest companies over the last several decades. And what notice is that they were, around 20% of the market. The top 10 always kind of took up that 20% space, but now it's just become almost twice that. And so I think that should be a warning to us, and that, maybe things have gotten much bigger than they really are, or maybe they're overpriced. I think what's also interesting is pick any company, and there is no company that has stayed in the top 10 since 1985, 40 years ago. So, look over 40 years here and show me a company that has persisted. Microsoft has been there for the last 20 years. We see Exxon there for a long time, but it's now gone. We see Apple has been there for, 10 years. But there's certainly a rotation. And I'm a little bit of a nerd, but the biggest company in the United States 110 years ago was the Pennsylvania Railroad, and we know they no longer exist. So, and they were bigger than the federal government. So just again, thinking about markets and just a real quick snapshot of where we've been. The market is positive 3 out of 4 years. If we look over the last 50 years or so, markets are positive 3 out of 4 years. But in any given year, they run negative. So even we're going through this period where stocks have pulled back and maybe just turned negative on the year here in the last week. And yet, that's not an unusual circumstance. We see stocks drop every year. So the red dot shows you the biggest drop in any given year that stocks received. And you can go back to, places like, good years in the market where, hey, stocks were up 24%, but still, lost 10% at some point during the journey. So again, we expect volatility even in the best of years, and we're certainly experiencing it now. And then this is the bond market. It's a little tighter, right? It drops a little bit. We've had some really yucky years recently, but bonds typically make money. They typically lose a little bit during the year, but usually end the year positive. And we've certainly seen the bond market recover maybe here in the last 2 years or so. But 2023 was a very, very difficult year, and many people believe the last time bonds were as bad as they were in 2023. George Washington was president and Alexander Hamilton was Treasury Secretary. I think another part of what's important in the economy is inflation. And I think the general trend we still see continues to be down. Obviously, the impact of the war is driving oil prices up, and I think that will persist for a while. And that can have an impact on inflation in the short term. But generally speaking, we were seeing inflation after peaking after the pandemic, continuing its downward trend, but still not in the ideal 2% target range. We can go back before the pandemic and see that we really held inflation really close and tight to that 2%. And we're really still a long way away from that too. And so that does influence what the Federal Reserve does. And then I just thinking about where consumers are and some warning signs that we're seeing here. This is the balance sheet of all of us added up together at the end of October of last year. So again, the American consumer continues to be pretty healthy on a collective level, but there are certainly some warnings. So on the left is if we take all of our assets together and add them up, we're worth about $202 trillion as a society, as a country, and we have about 10% of that is debt. Most of that is mortgages on our homes, but we know student loans, auto loans all weigh into that, revolving loans, but primarily, 2/3 of the debt in this country are mortgages on houses, and houses have gone up in value too. If you're fortunate enough to own one, now finding one can be a difficult thing. But I think the thing to kind of pay attention to for the consumer, and the reason I share this, by consumer drives 70% of economic activity in this country, the consumer spending. And so on the right, we're starting to see debt ratios start to creep back up. That's just how much of my income each month is going towards debt retirement, and that number is going up again. So that's always a concerning sign, and seems to peak in very difficult periods of time. And then in the bottom right-hand corner is delinquencies, people that have stopped paying on loans, and we've certainly seen an uptick over the last few years. And then, of course, there was no student loan payment for a long time. Now we're seeing a lot of student loan delinquencies. They were probably delinquent, but have just popped back up here now that the federal government has required it. So I'm gonna actually end my remarks, but by sharing this chart, and it's a very busy chart, so I don't need you to focus on it, but too much. But I'll share some themes. This is what happened to markets after a geopolitical event. And we go back all the way to 1973 and the Israeli-Arab war and the oil embargo. And the market sold off for 27 days. And then it lost 17% of its value in that roughly month period. And it took 1,546 days to recover. So it took years to recover from that. And those of you who were around then, I admit I was not quite born yet, would remember some of that as a very difficult period. However, what we also look at as we go down is, if we look at the first Gulf War, that was a 50-day period where markets were down, and I wonder, and maybe this war is closest to that. It's probably some of these are much more minor geopolitical events, but I think things like the Iraq War or first Gulf War in 1990 was the 50 days and took 81 days to recover. In 2003, the first Iraq War was 6 days of volatility and only 15 days to recover. Now, granted, we were at the back end of a recession then, and so the economy was recovering and doing very well in 2003. But all of this is to say that the volatility in all of these events, on average, is violent and lasts a couple of weeks and then kind of recovers in a couple of weeks, as if we look at it from that perspective. So I'm not convinced that what's happening in Iran is anything more than that. It certainly could be. There's always outliers, but I think when you're living in it, it's hard to keep that perspective. But when we look out at previous geopolitical events, wars and conflicts, some were very short, some have been prolonged. We see that it is a rough period of time, but it also can recover very quickly. So I make no promises that what we're dealing with now will be the same. However, I think a few general themes are stocks were expensive before all this started. Things will be volatile for a little while, and the underlying economy probably will drive the market more this year than what's happening in Iran. So at the end of the day, if companies continue to be profitable, if inflation is reasonable, if unemployment continues to stay low, if all those situations persist, I think it could be a good year. But I would also say all those things are fragile. Inflation could shoot up, unemployment could shoot up, and consumers could stop spending, and that would probably also make it for a very challenging year. So that's just a quick snapshot of where we are in the markets. I think it's good to kind of think about long term and remember that when we're living in a very difficult period of time, watching the TV, seeing what's happening with oil prices, seeing what's happening with food prices, that it's a little scary, or maybe a lot of scary, but also probably shorter lived. So I thought it would be good to kick off our presentation with a quick snapshot of where we are. But I'm really excited here to get Ralph up and have him chat with us a little bit. And these disclosures will be posted on our website if you want to go read them, because you can't possibly read them here. But we really appreciate you being here. And what I'm going to do is switch here so that Ralph does not have anything to present on the screen. So we'll turn the projector off, but we'll leave our camera on so the folks who are watching us online have the ability to join us. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Ralph Serpe. I am the president and CEO of the Adams County Community Foundation, a nationally certified community foundation down in Gettysburg, one of 38 community foundations in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and one of 850 around the country. Here are we in Cumberland County? We are covered by our friends at TFEC, the Foundation for Enhancing Communities. It's our sister foundation. Jen Doyle is the CEO there, and she and I have both served on the National Standards, Community Foundation National Standards Board. That's my pedigree and my connection to here. After this, it all goes out the window. I've spent 26 years at community foundations in Silicon Valley, Princeton, Baltimore, and here in Gettysburg. And while I run a community foundation, my main source of joy and is being a clinician, and I am a philanthropic advisor. I sit down with individuals, families, and businesses and talk through their charitable giving plan, what drives them and what moves them. And economic updates notwithstanding, almost every story about charitable giving is not built on a financial plan or the markets. It's built on a story, a very personal story. I think we have some fund development people in the room. Is Messiah here? Somebody is. No. Did they leave already? Oh, rats. That's a shame, because I could use them to get in front of the camera while I do this. But they and most of us who work in philanthropy will have discovered that philanthropy is a very personal response to people's life experiences. There's a lot of guys in the room, so we're going to have to talk about feelings, and I apologize up front that we're going to have to talk about feelings, but we're going to do it. We're going to do that today. And I found that people give because something in their life moved them and had an effect on them. And so someone who was helped through a very difficult time, someone who wants to remember a loved one, a family member, a work colleague, and someone who perhaps believes in fairness and opportunity. It all motivates people to give back. I have a little piece here from the Community Foundation. And on the bottom, I have this, it's called Giving Back, and it explains how to create a charitable fund. But on the bottom, it says, when you're ready to give back. And the reason why I put that on the front of this publication is because over the past 26 years, when I initially meet someone, they sit down and they say, I'm ready to give back. They're at a point where they want to do something. So I put their own words on that. So I've noticed that people give for several different reasons. And so I've grouped them into some categories behind that. So today we're going to talk about the stories behind that generosity. The number one reason why people sit down and have a conversation about giving is that they want to honor someone they love. Oftentimes it's someone who has recently passed, and they are looking for a way to remember someone important to them. And so the most common motivation there is about love and remembrance. They want to remember someone. I'm going to take a pause earlier on this one and say, I want you to think about someone you really care about. Could be Jim, could be me, could be a member of your family. You're lucky and you still talk to them. And I want you to think about if they weren't there and you wanted to remember them or honor them. Here's my suggestion to them. I want you to strongly consider honoring how they lived and what they lived for, as opposed to honoring how they died and what took them from you. We work with families who have created charitable funds and charitable foundations that honor or support how someone died. And it becomes a very painful annual reminder that they revisit year after year. When you think about the people in your life who, I will tell you, for me, I would run over my grandmother to do anything related to music education, drum corps, color guard, any music program, anything that introduces a young person to the joy of music, I'm in. And I often tell my family, if I walk out of the parking lot and I get hit by that bus that was there when I walked in, please, for the love of God, do not create the Ralph Serpe Don't Get Hit by a Bus Foundation. That's not what I lived for. I lived for something very different. And so people want to remember people that were important to them. I've worked with a family down in Adams County. Their mom was a teacher in a local school district. And not only did she spend 40 years in the classroom and then she retired, like many people who retire after about 2.5 months, she decided, I don't want to be retired. So she went back to the classroom as a volunteer. And she remained a volunteer for the next 30 years. So she was in the classroom till she was 65, left for a few months, and then went back and was a classroom volunteer till she was in her mid-90s. Her daughter said that's what killed her and kept her alive at the same time. And when she died, her daughter wanted to honor her mother's dedication to education. And for many people, the automatic knee-jerk reaction is a scholarship fund. And I'm just gonna, here's my other recommendation. Scholarships are dead. They don't do what people our age think they do. There are other ways to invest in education. That's not, this one I'm glad Messiah isn't here. Aren't you on the board of some college or university? Yeah, she's. It's not good. So this donor, not only was she also, her daughter was also a teacher, but she was also a very bright woman on the financial side. So if you go to Penn State, what's tuition at Penn State? Roundabout. 30,000. Let's 50.
Yeah. My son's a senior.
Good Lord. Okay, that's even worse. So in my example, it's 30,000 and math is bad for me. So I'm going to keep it at 30,000 for now, but I'll redo it because I can't reset myself. I appreciate it. Yeah. Gettysburg College is now $86,000. And I still can't find a plumber. So here's what they wanted to do. So they realized that if they had $1,000 to give away in a scholarship, they could send $1,000 to a student who's going to Penn State. How many credit hours do you earn a year? 30, right? So $1,000, $30,000 a year. If my math is correct, without the $50,000 number, that's 1 credit hour, right? Your $1,000 scholarship is paying for 1 credit hour for a student. And you wonder why they don't send you a thank you note. Should make it 10,000. So this particular donor said, I could support 1 student for 1 credit hour, or because my mother taught at this school, I could take that same $1,000 and pay for a student's AP exam. So AP classes are students who take college level courses in high school. Then at the end of that course, they'll take an exam and they'll earn anywhere between 1 to 3 credit hours, depending on their grade. So let's assume, and they're about $100 a piece, these exams, $92.53, unless they've gone up to $50,000. So that $1,000, instead of paying for 1 credit hour to a student who goes up to Penn State, never to return again to your hometown. We'll pay for 10 AP exams. If all of those students ace that exam and they get 3 credit hours toward college, instead of 1 credit hour, you now have 30 credit hours. The same $1,000 is now covering 30 credit hours for 10 students. And sometimes in that example, we have one student who's taking 2 or 3 exams. And in our area, students who are often taking AP exams have brothers and sisters, and their parents aren't pretty happy about not only paying for sports equipment and travel teams, and now they're being asked to cover the cost of these schools. But in this particular case, this donor is honoring her mother in the school where she taught and helping students far beyond what she assumed she would do. And so if you ever think about or talk to anyone about scholarships, give me a call. I'll give you about 10 different things you can do that are much more effective in helping kids achieve higher education. And in the case of this particular fund, this donor sees that type of philanthropy as a living memorial to her mother. It keeps her mother's name alive in the school district where she taught for decades. And while it's not something that's carved in stone or up on a building, it's every year it's happening, and it's in the place where she. Number one, honoring someone they love. Number two, people want to give back to a community that was really good to them. And sometimes that community is a church. Sometimes it's a geographic area. Sometimes it's a school. So as an 18-year-old walks into a new school, a new campus, and it's the first time they're being an adult somewhere outside of home. And so maybe your son will give back to State College in a way that'll make your head spin one day. But I hope not. I hope he keeps it here. I worked with a couple, 2 engineers. They may have started pets.com, and they were driving down 95 to Florida from here, and their car broke down on a Sunday in North Carolina, in a little town, little nothing town. And they pull into this closed garage, gas station, nobody there. Within 5 minutes, someone had called Barney Fife to say there are 2 Northerners at the gas station. And so police came out, they had a conversation, car was sputtering on the turnpike. Here we are. And within, they said 20 to 30 minutes, the garage reopened. There was no hotel in town, but they found a place for them to sleep overnight because they needed a part that could only come the next day. And they said over the next 36 hours, this little town in North Carolina came out for them in a way that shocked them because, of course, they lived north of the Mason-Dixon line. So that was all very confusing to them. They're engineers. They sold their company to a much larger company. And when I met them, they had about $20 million that they wanted to give. And they wanted to give to this town because while they were waiting for the garage to reopen and this makeshift bed and breakfast to be created for them, they learned all about the water treatment plant in town. And this couple gave millions of dollars to this little town of 450 people to help them with their water treatment plant and infrastructure. And because they're engineers, they thought to themselves, if we help the infrastructure of this town, they'll be able to attract new business. And they had this big plan for this community, and this community was grateful for that support. You never know who you're talking to, and you never know their situation. Jim mentioned you're going to hear a little bit about railroads. Well, 125 years ago, Oscar Murray was the president of the B&O Railroad down in Baltimore. And confirmed bachelor, never married, no children. And he has about a 20-page will that's in cursive Can your son read cursive?
No.
Awesome. So this morning I mentioned that when my parents and grandparents wanted to share information and not have the kids know what they were talking about, they'd speak Italian. My parents didn't know that on the side I was learning Italian, so I could listen in to hear what they were talking about. And it was usually something about my brother doing something he wasn't supposed to do, which I would go back and tell him. Oscar Murray, Oscar Murray's will is all in this beautiful 1890s cursive. It's just the most beautiful document I've ever read. And I read it every year for 10 years when I was with the Baltimore Community Foundation, because his will left his entire estate to the widows and orphans of B&O Railroad that he knew of. It's about 15 pages of individual names and addresses. And at the very end, he has, and the rest and residual of my estate to future widows and orphans of the B&O Railroad. And that future designation eventually came to be at the Baltimore Community Foundation. And when I was there 10 years ago and recently, there are still 7 widows and orphans of the B&O Railroad. That means that railroad worker at 80 married a 20-year-old. They're still living. And what happens with that fund beyond what they're able to support widows and orphans, it supports destitute women of Baltimore City, which was the legal term they used back in the 1900s. So his original charitable intent is still being supported through a charitable fund. And it's all about honoring or not honoring. It's sort of getting back to this community of employees that were really good to him. And you can read that in his will. He talks about how important his employees were in 1900, which is an odd thing to read when you think about the shenanigans that were going on with the robber barons of the turn of the last century. People also want to, as a theme, support the organizations that help them, that were important to them. And sometimes I refer to that as pivot points. People were going down a path and then suddenly it's a college, it's a church, it's a nonprofit organization. Our friends at Planned Parenthood don't have any corporate or foundation donors, for the most part, but the people they've helped over time, women's health organizations don't get a lot of corporate sponsorship unless it's Bristol Myers Squibb or Dove as companies, which is Unilever, and they all have problems in any event. But they rely on contributions from people that have had direct impact and a redirection in their life because of it. And so those personal stories and those personal interactions with nonprofits spur people to give back to those organizations. All right, I won't say it. Another theme around giving is creating opportunities that were either denied to you or you didn't have. And you get to a place in your life when you think, I want to give back in this way. I work with a couple, John and Mary Shush, down in Gettysburg. John has since passed, but Mary is still going strong. And we have a technical high school like Cumberland Perry up here, but we have a small technical high school down in Gettysburg. And school districts pay for their students to go to the county technical high school. In Adams, it's about $8,000 to $9,000 per student that the district pays, which means we all pay to send those students to the technical high school. So I want to be clear whose money it is. But when students go into these programs, whether it's diesel mechanic or allied health or culinary arts, they have to pay for uniforms, tools, something. They have to pay for something. And this couple said, she said, I wanted to go to technical training when I was in high school and my family didn't have the money for me for the uniforms for nursing. talked about the nursing. And so they have created a fund that pays for students at Adams County Tech Prep to pay for their tools, uniforms, anything they need to participate. So it's not a barrier to participate in those tech programs. It gives them great joy to do that. And every once in a while, I ask the school, can you sew their name in the middle of that, in that little chef's hat that they wear? So people like to turn their own missed opportunities. Like I know, Kevin, you wanted to be an opera singer. And it just wasn't happening. So
I want you to share that.
I know, I'm sorry. And the whole thing about, when you go to perform, break a leg, you do it often. Now you've broken a wrist. But that opportunity of thinking of those missed opportunities. When I was in high school, I asked my dad, I said, I'm going to march the Long Island Kingsmen Drum Corps this summer. And my dad said, no, you're not. You're going to work this summer. You're not going to spend money this summer. You're going to earn money this summer before you go to school. And I have now spent the next 30, 40 years raising money so other kids can march in drum corps and marching band because my dad said no. That conversation has sat with me my entire life. And there you go. Donors as a group, people as a group like to, are sometimes motivated by, I would say, fairness and justice. They see an injustice in the world. They see a world that's not fair, and they want to even the playing field, and they want to give folks opportunities. They want to address inequities in the world. They want to support what they see as underserved communities. And they want to do things like protect the environment. We have a fund for the environment at the Community Foundation created by donors who want to make environmental stewardship a shared community value. And so the grants that they make from that fund supports what they see as environmental justice in a community that relies heavily on agriculture and the viewshed for tourism and agriculture. It's a big part of what generates. Okay. That sort of falls under the philanthropy as a tool for change. That's the nice thing. The other reason, which I see a lot of, is revenge philanthropy. Which example? Okay. So sometimes, I think I've said this before. No, I'll say it. I'll say it now. I'll add this again. Parents, if you want to encourage your children to give back and you create a charitable fund or foundation or trust and you put them in charge of it, gentlemen, you have to tell them whether or not your expectation is that they will continue to support the organizations that you're supporting. I'm going to be sexist. Men say, I want you to continue to make that grant to Penn State and continue to make that grant to St. Matt's. That's what they say. I want you to continue my charitable legacy. Moms say, I just want generous children, and I want you to be philanthropic wherever it takes you. And sometimes that means if dad wanted the money to go to Penn State every year in the family name, the children start making grants to Ohio State and Columbus, or God forbid, Michigan. And sometimes the children have great joy in sending a check to Michigan, a school they never attended, but one that took their dad away from, Penn State took their father away every Saturday for, 12 weeks in the fall. I hear more stories about how dad was absent because they were too busy with their head buried in a Pittsburgh Pirates, Penguins, Philadelphia Phillies. Sports can either bring you together or push you apart. That's what guys of our generation do. Guys of a younger generation are hanging on these phones all the time. The best family meetings I have is when I walk into a home and there's a basket right by the front door and everybody's phone goes in the basket until you leave. Little side. So revenge philanthropy. I was called into a meeting with a client, a new donor. When I walked in the room, a conference room about this size, she was standing, she was in a black dress, head to toe, pearls around her neck. She had a hat on. We were inside. It was the summertime. She's standing out, she's looking out the window like this. I never saw her face, but I knew she was wearing glasses, sunglasses. And she asked if the community foundation could accept a home, her primary residence. That, as I discovered, she received in a divorce settlement. Could we use that home? Can we use that asset to create a charitable fund? Yes. Can I name the fund whatever I wish? Yes. Can I name it for my ex-husband's family? So do you still have his name? Yes. Then yes. Who decides where the money goes? That's your choice. Where would you like the money to go? She said, I'd like it to support the capital campaigns at domestic violence shelters. We can do that. She's still looking out the window. She said, now my family's husband is in Boston. I'd like you to make grants to domestic violence shelters in Boston. And of course, we live here in Silicon Valley, so I'd like you to do it here. And he's just moved to Seattle, so I'd like you to do it there too. And if he moves, I'd like the money to follow him and the name of this fund and what it supports to follow him. Can you do that? She looked down at my card. Ralph, we can do it. She turned and she took off her glasses. And I could see this deep indent line scar right across her face. It's still with me. That home sold for just under $5 million. It generates $250,000 a year, more than that now. And it is one of the perfect examples of revenge philanthropy I've ever had the pleasure of working on. Really meaningful for her, healing for her. And this piece, although that's this one story of turning what eventually she referred to as a house of hell into something positive for others, that it was healing for her. It's also healing for the people that work on that fund every year. And so this idea of shaping a world that you want to live in is also part of the conversation that individuals and families have around what it means to be us, what it means to be us as an individual and our families. So my stories of generosity are based on people's values, what you bring to the table. Ultimately, philanthropy represents what matters most to people. And some of those common values are around faith, number one, education, close number two, and then creativity, community, and opportunity. People think about it. And so we think about giving visibility to those values with individuals and families. I know that sounds all gobbledygook, but when you're sitting around a table with a family and it says, what does it mean to be us? What do we stand for? It's a pretty evolved conversation to have in your brain with a spouse, with your children and grandchildren. Most of my Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays are spent in people's homes when all the family has gathered and they're sitting around deciding where their family dollars are going to go. And it's very interesting to have parents, sometimes a grandmother, because, you know, guys, we don't last. So it's grandmother and the parents and children, and the children live in San Francisco, Omaha, Nebraska. Never here, they never stay, but their values are different. Their focus areas are different. And so having those conversations together, oh, I say those two things, right? I forgot. Number one, did you say there's no U-Haul?
You can't see a hearse with, you never see a hearse with a U-Haul behind it.
Because you can't take it with you.
That's
You
right.
never see a hearse with a U-Haul behind it. That's what Jim says. What I say is if the first time your kids are talking about money is at your funeral, you waited too long. And so part of what happens with me is people will create a charitable fund. They will name their children as an advisor to the fund, and they never have the conversation. What do you want me to do with this? Because they never talk about money with their spouse or their kids. And so you leave that to me. So, so when people create a charitable fund, foundation, or trust, I encourage them. Those documents give the technical side of giving, what the name of the fund is going to be, what it's going to do, who's going to make the grants, how does it work. But it doesn't give them instructions. The way Oscar Murray gave us instructions on his Widows and Orphans Fund. Consider, no matter what you do, after you write a will, if it has bequests to nonprofits or not, write a letter from the heart. Tell them what inspired you or motivated you to make these decisions. It is the greatest gift you can give children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren you'll never meet, because that letter will sit with them for a long time. A few years ago, it was Christmas Eve, and I'm at my in-laws. And there's kids running around and Christmas gifts going everywhere. It was a big time, as we say, a big time going on in the Tate household. And at the end, there was an envelope left on the tree. And my mother-in-law turns to her youngest grandson and she says, "Marty, get that envelope for me." So he grabs the envelope, and my dear sweet mother-in-law, Linda, grabs this envelope and she opens up and she reads a letter to her family. And she talks about moving here from Hollidaysburg as a 20-year-old with no family in the area, no connection, and being welcomed into a new church, and their kids being welcomed into the school district. And they were very, very young parents of 2 children. And in this letter, she tells them that she's so proud of her children and what they've become. And it's not because of their great parenting skills, but because they had a church that surrounded them and a school that cared for them and taught them. I was watching my brother-in-law at the time, and he's staring up at his mother like this. And then she said, "And that's why your father and I have decided to gift our entire estate to the Spring Grove Area Education Foundation, Spring Grove in York County." My brother-in-law started to weep a little bit, and I didn't know whether it was happiness or disappointment. And good thing I have notes to go from. It's a very emotional time. It's Christmas Eve. It's quiet. You can hear a pin drop. And the response from her children was not, "There goes the inheritance." My God, you can tell I'm old. I have a reader's. Their response was, this is what their parents are going to do through their estate, which means it's not going to generate money back to the school district until after they both pass. So what the children decided to do, and the grandchildren now, is they calculated how much that endowment would send to the school district. And so every year I get an invoice from my brother-in-law that tells me how much my share is of this future endowment payout. Their story of generosity that they shared with their children resulted in their children saying, we don't want you to wait. We want you to see what's going to happen. So now when you walk into the Spring Grove area high school, you'll see the Pete and Linda Tate and family music and theater department. So they get to see it. They both got to see what they're alive. My father-in-law has since passed. Thank you for that wonderful repass of the church, by the way. It was spectacular. But those stories of involving families, generous parents raise generous children. They see it and they want to emulate it. That's what kids do. So how do people make this happen? They can give through their estate. So you can create a bequest, you can do a retirement plan designation, you can create a charitable legacy for the communities that you love through an estate, or you can create a charitable fund or foundation or trust during your lifetime. And what I love about that is that it allows you to sort of give in real time and watch it happen. And are there any nonprofits in the room? I want to pick on one. No? Yeah.
Yep. For TFEC.
Oh, awesome. Great. I'm not going to pick on TFEC because we're a sister organ. We're more than that. We're really more than that. But you can watch how they deploy those dollars during your lifetime. So it's no big mystery about how they're going to work it in the future. The other thing that people think about that's meaningful is the asset they give. I shared earlier, I've worked with clients who come to us with a stock certificate. You know what a stock certificate is? You're young. Who the young people are? Okay, young people don't know what a stock. So when instead of digital shares, you used to get this really beautifully illustrated, colorful certificate that had. There was always in one corner some naked statue doing this on that side. And the other side, it was like the Exxon Mobil person on that side. It was a beautiful. And people gave them to their children and grandchildren, and people hold on to those stock certificates like they're precious, and they are. And so when people use those shares of stock to create a charitable fund, the asset is really meaningful. So not only of the grants going out the door is meaningful, but the asset that's coming in. And sometimes that's a family home. Sometimes in this area, when the children do not want the family farm because they've moved out of the area. When the land that people are tied to become part of a charitable fund, it's really meaningful to people. Same thing with business interests. So families have grown businesses, they've become very successful. Nobody wants to milk cows anymore in Adams County, do they? Not many. So a beneficial interest in a family business can become the root of a charitable fund. And sometimes the most meaningful assets that people own become the most meaningful asset to put into a charitable fund to support the things that they love. How are we doing? Good. I talk about involving family members in this decision making. Again, I'm going to pick on the gentleman. That means that you have to open up the grip around where money goes, and sometimes it's really difficult. I've worked with families where some family members want to give to the NRA Foundation, and some families want to give to the Jim Brady Foundation, which are at polar opposites. And then, of course, they push me into the room as if this comedian's going to be able to tell them how to make that all work. But if there's an open dialogue about what's important to them, that seems to work. We have families that will give each family member a certain dollar amount to give. But if a generation gives together, if they pool their money together and decide to give together, a family will double it. And if they can get their parents to put money in, they'll double it again. So there are families that sort of use the incentive to give more to the things that the family members care about. It's an incentive for them to talk to each other and come to some kind of consensus. Stories of generosity. I once worked with a family. The estate was $32 million. Each 3 of the 4 children got 8 million. It netted 32, 8 million, 8 million. Second spouse, 8 million. The youngest child, who cared for the patriarch, got 0. And his letter from the heart to that youngest child, who cared for him in the last 2 years of his life, even though he was married in another city with 3 children of his own, working a full-time job, was, I didn't want to ruin your character with this money. So he put that youngest child as the advisor to the charitable fund and gave him the responsibility of pulling in second wife, youngest carousing playboy brother, and disconnected daughter. And that was interesting. If I was going to have a beer with any of them, I would have a beer with the youngest one. Great, great guy. And so, at least in that family and in multiple families, charitable giving is part of their family culture. And it's one of the things I see the most is when people create a charitable fund in memory of a parent or a grandparent, and the children get together and they decide every year where a grant from that charitable fund is going to go. And they replay the person's life and what was important to them. And they all make recommendations and they all decide. And I love that feeling at the end of those conversations where they say, oh, dad would have liked that. Mom would have really liked that. And so we have families that now have grandchildren and great-grandchildren around the table who didn't know the people whose names are on this charitable fund. But when the conversation starts and they say, we're going to make a gift to the church where mom and dad got married, or for those kids, their great-grandparents got married, which is in another city and another town, but we want to connect it to them. We're going to make a grant to the SPCA in the town where our family adopted every animal that came through our house. And so they tell those stories about the organizations that touched the nucleus of this family. And so those stories are told and repeated. And so this type of generosity becomes part of their family culture. And it's a different conversation than when you normally have with people, again, that they have their phones with them and they're looking down in their laps the whole time. Our family meetings are phoneless. And you know, it almost looks like people look like a fish on the dock without their phone, like they're flopping around because they're always, you know, reaching for it. It's a very weird thing. Okay, so I started by saying that every charitable gift, there's a story behind it. And my job as a philanthropic advisor is uncovering those stories to see what's really important to people. I'm talking a lot now, but generally I don't say a word. But those stories are always about gratitude, love. Love is a big motivator here. Hope, justice, opportunity. Opportunity is a big one. And when people turn those values into philanthropy based on their personal experience, something really powerful happens. It's not transactional. That's your job. It really isn't about money. It's about what matters most, and that's the community we leave behind. Thank you for your time. Any questions, comments?
I make a comment as a leader in the church. I think it is really helpful for people to make their gifts, create those opportunities and those things. But I caution being too narrow. Because we have those gifts now, you know, that a person from this church who will go major in organ in college will receive this scholarship. And no one has left that church to major in organ ever.
Yes.
And
So that, okay, so in 26 years, I have overseen 7 altar flower funds. The roof is leaking. The HVAC doesn't work. The microphone is, you can't hear what there's, but don't worry. We have thousands of dollars for altar flowers. So altar flowers are important. And I say, let the weekend brides pay for the altar flowers every week. I can say that. But I do, and this is part of being a philanthropic advisor, I really appreciate that question. We have conversations with donors about what happens 7 generations, not even center. Okay. Who knows your mother's maiden name? Raise your hand. Who knows your grandmother's maiden name? Both of them. Who knows all of your great-grandmother's maiden names? So we don't have to go back 7. You're forgotten in 3. Shame on you. Shame on you. But I trade in that. Be remembered. When I talk to folks about this very issue, and I really credit development. My first will was when I was 25 years old, and it included a bequest to the undergraduate school I went to. And I called the development office, the advancement office at the State University of New York College at Fredonia. And this wonderful woman answered the phone, and I said, I'm putting a bequest in my will. And she says, how old are you? I said, I'm 25. And she goes, oh, I'm never going to see this. And she's gone. But she did say, what would you like it to do? So I was a bricklayer before I went to school, and I wasn't much into books, but I discovered them when I went to school. So I said, I'd like to create a gift that would pay for books in the library. And so she said, you're 25. This gift won't come for another 75 years. She said to me in 1987, do you really think there'll be printed books in 75 years? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just a bricklayer who graduated from your school. What do I know? You tell me. She goes, let's sort of talk through what this might look like and what your charitable purpose is and what you want to support. And really helped move me to broaden an organization. I'm going to say, if you can't make a gift to an organization, if you can't give TFEC $1 million to let TFEC make Dolphin, Cumberland, Perry, Franklin better, I'm not going to include York. It's have a little stay out of it. If you don't trust them to make a decision with your charitable gift, then don't make it. I'm going to tell you that because every day I see that control of, I'm going to give you something, but it's only for altar flowers. It's for the organist scholarship. I had a gentleman who graduated from Littlestown High School in 1955 want to create a football scholarship for a graduate from Littlestown High School to go to Penn State to play football. and said, how many Littletown graduates went to Penn State to play football? And he proudly said, one in 1952, and I went to school with them. Said it's not going to happen. So in that conversation, his decision was eventually to support sports programs at Littlestown. So instead of one great football player from Littlestown going somewhere, they're creating a community of well-rounded Division III athletes from Littlestown. And that's the other thing. If you're ever, when I talk about scholarships being dead, I'm just going to say there are so many awesome options, scholarships to scholarships, alternatives. If you want to pluck the best swimmer out of a local high school to send them to the University of South Florida or Georgia or Stanford, just consider, go to TFEC, say, how can I introduce the joy of swimming to every kid in my county? And they will give you a list of things that you can do, supporting the Y, supporting high schools. Same thing, Cumberland Valley. Cumberland Valley has one of the best arts and culture programs in the state, rivaled only by Norwin in Pittsburgh and something happening in Westchester. You get much more bang for your buck by introducing the joy of something. Do kids from Cumberland Valley have to go to Juilliard or the Eastman School of Music to audition? No. Juilliard and Eastman and all the music schools in this country come to Cumberland Valley. You're creating this critical mass of excellence in a particular area. And you can do that as a donor with the same amount of money you're going to spend to get one kid from Cumberland Valley to Juilliard for 4 years. $50,000? You can do a lot for $200,000 at a local school. And your name is there and you're part of it. I'm a big fan. Two things that our community foundation has worked on over the last few years. One is scholarship displacement. You create a scholarship. Our son graduates from a local high school. He goes to Penn State. Penn State says, we'd love to have you here. It's $50,000 a year. We're going to give you a $20,000 financial aid package. And he says, great. And I have this $10,000 scholarship from TFEC or Rotary or my school foundation. And Penn State says, wonderful. Now your $20,000 scholarship financial aid package is $10,000. Scholarship displacement happens when a school reduces their financial aid by these private scholarships that are coming in. That's why I say scholarships are dead. They're better alternatives. The Adams County Community Foundation, working with the Miss Pennsylvania Scholarship Foundation. Miss Pennsylvania Scholarship Foundation is part of the Miss America organization, the largest provider of scholarships to women in this country, period. 38 candidates in 2022 went across the Miss Pennsylvania candidates went across the state to talk to their local legislators about eliminating scholarship displacement at public colleges and universities in Pennsylvania. In 2022, we became the 4th state that says instead of reducing that financial aid amount, that $10,000 scholarship stacks on top of it. So instead of coming up with 30,000, you only have to come up with 20 for 4 years. The second is intestate succession. When you die without a will, you die intestate. That's what it's called. And when you die intestate, who decides where your money goes? The state. The state decides. And if you die without a will and you die without family, and they'll say, okay, you've died, you don't have a will, it's going to go to your spouse. No spouse, it goes to your kids. No kids, it goes to your parents. No parents, it goes to your brothers and sisters. Succession. And at the very end, if you die without a will and you die without family, who gets the money? The state, the general fund. Not anymore. 2 years ago, the Community Foundation in Adams County, with help from the Register of Wills Association of Pennsylvania, they're elected people, so they wanted to get reelected. We have changed the statute in Pennsylvania. When people die without a will and they die without a family, the money goes to an endowed community grant-making fund at a community foundation of the decedent's last residence. So that means if anyone from Dolphin, Cumberland, Perry, or Franklin die without a will and without family, it'll go to TFAC for a community grant making fund that will support nonprofits in those individual counties, keeping money local, charitable, and endowed, and not into the general fund of a $55 billion, $57 billion state budget. Pennsylvania passed 15% of the bills that were introduced last year in the middle of a federal government shutdown and a state budget impasse. That bill was introduced April 1st and it was signed on November 24th. And that work started right here. So please make sure you have a valid will with an original wet signature and people know where it is. Just a suggestion. If you have one and no one can find it, it doesn't exist. Okay, I think I'm done ordering people around.
Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you.